Hello. Welcome to SHOWstudio. Today is the first of 3 roundup panels that we are going to be giving about the menswear shows for Autumn/Winter 2018. Starting off with our home city of London. But before we get into some of the themes that we want to discuss today, or some of the things that I think warrant discussion about the menswear shows, particularly in London, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. Starting with you, George.
Hi, I'm Georgie Evans. I'm fashion editor here at SHOWstudio.
Hi, I'm Osman Ahmed and I'm a fashion writer.
Hi, I'm Jason Hughes and I'm the fashion editor of Wallpaper.
Hi, I'm Simon Chilvers, the men's style director at matchesfashion.com.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
So, I wanted to start off talking about London in the way that it's almost, I think for so long, London as a city, particularly through the kind of lens of fashion, has always come with this introduction of its kind of zany, young, cool, spunky, punky spirit. And I wanted to, first off, ask you all if you think it still warrants that. Does it still have it? And if so, what is it? Simon?
Well, I think it definitely still has it in the sense that it's definitely the city that is still doing shows that are quite statements.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's quite a few of them that I'm sure we're going to talk about as the panel evolves. But in terms of like newness and new designers that are coming up, it still feels very much the heart of where those designers are being seen. And I don't think there are many fashion capitals where somewhere like Grace Wells Bonnet or Craig would come through and evolve businesses which are now really successful. So in that sense, definitely still where we see a lot of the new things coming. I think probably this last set of shows was quite an interesting set in general because there's so much changing about the way in which we look at shows, the timing of shows. I mean, this week the CFDA had said they might move New York to like December and June. So, you know, and I think that's kind of like been interesting in the sense in which, you know, we don't actually know how the schedule is going to look. And you know, there's this massive conversation around big brand versus small designers, and obviously London has now become very much about the latter. And you can argue it on either way. Like in some senses, great, London still remains the home of the new. On the other hand, does it mean that the absence of some of the bigger brands means less people come? So.
Because doesn't this newness, this new, doesn't that kind of put a lot of people off as well? In a really basic fiscal way, it seems to put people off in terms of, well, we'll just miss this because we know that lots of the designers that want to be taken very seriously in whatever way you can unpack that yourselves, will always show their collection in a showroom in Paris. So if we're going to Paris anyway and we're flying over from Japan or wherever it might be, or America, let's just miss this out altogether. And I think particularly these shows, or the shows in January, suffer from that quite a lot, because of course they're very, very close to Christmas. So most of us are exhausted and bloated and tired. Not to mention the poor designers who have not had any break whatsoever. So this newness, does it sometimes work against us? Jason, what do you think?
I mean, I think for me personally, I mean, I found London menswear quite tricky over the last few seasons. I found the schedule, you know, you mentioned being bloated, but I found the schedule bloated, filled with lots of designers and brands that I don't necessarily need to see on a catwalk.
Yeah.
And thus making the whole experience actually sort of killing some of the excitement of the week, you know, and I mean I personally would really like to see an edit,
Yes,
you know, on quite a bold scale, just to condense the talent that we do have showing in the city. So I think there are some amazing talents and designers showing who are really exciting, and I feel are very progressive and in touch with what is happening now, not only now, but what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
But I just feel like some of their focus is being tarnished maybe by some of the other brands that are showing, which don't necessarily really need to show.
Why do you think they are showing? Do you think the BFC are inviting them to Because I guess the ones you're talking about, which can or cannot remain named, is up to you, are more commercial, maybe,
Yes.
and more high street brands
Yes.
or upper end of the high street, certain labels that maybe also haven't shown before, have put on shows.
Well, I think some of it is a kudos factor as well. You know, I mean, they like to be aligned with cooler, you know, designers or brands or an exciting fashion week.
Osman, what do you think?
I mean, it's funny because I remember when I first started discovering the shows, and you had all of these kind of tailoring brands, you know, and the kind of the leftovers from Savile Row, and that was really the mainstay of the week. And
When was that?
years ago, but I feel as though London has always had that heritage, and the younger designers, the more exciting ones, were always in women's wear. And then there was this kind of moment where, you know, you had Craig Green and all of these exciting new names in menswear arriving, which I think are the most exciting things about the London shows today. I mean, if you look at it, it's kind of Charles Jeffrey, Grace Wells-Bonner, Craig Green, and each of those designers really put on a show. And I think obviously they go to Paris to do their showrooms, but they really make the most of having that space in the schedule and consider everything from the music to the sets to showpieces that will never end up on the shop floor. And I think that has a real value.
George, what do you think? Because there is this sense of that designers, that we're all talking about them, that they're almost like they're showing here now. I think there's always this kind of, I guess, insecurity that we have as a city, particularly with our design talent, is that we're educating the best to the best level in the world. Everyone has passed through a major fashion house, has learned something from this city, but they tend to leave. They show here for a bit and then they go. So, for example, rumours around Cotweiler, who we'll go on to talk about later, rumours are that they're going to be showing in Paris next season. You know, of course, there are designers who have decided to show co-ed, but during the women's, so I guess they get more of a focus on the men's, they get more attention, then it's bigger. But how do we feel about that sense of this, well, I'm here at the moment, but I'll graduate out of London Fashion Week, because that's a real problem, isn't it?
My worry is that all the designers you mentioned could so easily slot into the Paris schedule, or could slot, not so much Craig could slot into women's, but Wales could so easily. And my worry is that they're not, those brands alone aren't a draw enough. And as you were saying, those fluffers, shall we say, sometimes dilute the water. And I noticed loads in menswear that the amount of people, the press, the buyers, everything was significantly less.
Yes.
So there's a misconnection there that people aren't coming, and when they are coming, they're like, oh Christ, what's this? And I'm just here for Craig. But that could so easily disappear. I think there's potential for it to go.
But what needs to be done to change that? Because, of course, this is a big responsibility of the British Fashion Council to, and they're under huge pressure to do this, because I think the criticisms that we're offering now aren't necessarily new, but I think, to me personally, they felt very pertinent to the January shows. It did really feel threadbare, which is a word I love using, but particularly there was this kind of, on the opposite side, there was a bloating, but what that meant is that, you know, in most of our roles, it means that you have to cut out what you are and are not going to engage with. And it is as simple as that. And I think it's what some people might not necessarily understand, because I think when I was younger or starting off as a student, I rather naively thought that it was your job to see everything. You know, you are a journalist or a stylist, or we work in this business, you should go and see everything. But that's impossible. It's become impossible. And I really worry that actually some of those younger, smaller, kookier, if you like, brands that are really trying to kind of do away with this system are still not really getting that attention.
But I do think that with all of the bigger brands like JW Anderson, Burberry, etc., moving on to the women's wear schedule, there is a real value for those younger designers to make more noise in a threadbare schedule. You know, for them, they can actually be the biggest show on any given day, and in the digital world, that kind of resonates with a global audience and travels much faster.
Yeah, I think also there needs to be some consideration given to editors and writers, you know, and the amount of shows they're covering, and and we have to remember that it's not only shows that editors and writers are covering. They have in between shows there are showroom appointments, there are resees, within Fashion Week schedules, not necessarily in London, but within Milan and Paris, which gives very full days with no respite, and I think sort of in London, I think it would. Taking into account that people have that to look forward to, then it almost would benefit not to see so much.
So who made the most noise?
And
Literally, Charles Jeffrey.
Charles Jeffrey. Let us start with Charles. So, Osman, I know you work with Charles. You write
Yes, yeah.
really beautiful show notes. So why don't you tell us how this collection came about, from your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, working with Charles is always so great because he has a million ideas, and I'm always incredibly worried because I never, it's so hard to put your finger on until the show itself, and you get to show and it just turns into something completely different to what I thought that it was going to look like. And with this show, he borrowed this slogan from Johnny Rotten, which is "anger is an energy," and he wanted to explore anger as a very visceral, volatile emotion. He had also read *The Velvet Rage*, which is a book by Alan Downes about kind of queer culture and gay men kind of having an anger and kind of a lot of pent-up emotion that they take out on nightlife, which is obviously where the label began, and flamboyance and peacockery and ostentation. So all of these kind of ideas come together, and obviously he works with Theo Adams, who staged, kind of a performance within the show. But I think for me, really, energy is the key word for him, because I don't think that there was one person in that room who didn't feel, an pulsating, very raw energy kind of coming through in the drums, with this Pictish blue painted drummer, banging on the drums, and Theo Adams performers kind of screaming at the audience. I mean, it was quite scary. I sat next to a colleague of mine who was holding on to me for dear life because she was incredibly scared. And I think that that's quite wonderful, that it was real. I mean, I know that it was live streams and kind of, went out into the world, but if you were there, it was such a moment. It was. I thought that it was a real fashion moment. And obviously it was kind of about Scotland and, all of these different ideas, but there always are so many ideas there with him. Yeah.
Do you think the clothes get lost in some of that?
No, I think that they really form. I know that there's so much paint, there's so many characters within his shows, but actually, I mean, the resounding response was that the clothes looked the best that they had, and the production and the if you actually look at the pattern cutting, it's incredible. Some of that tailoring is very, very good, and even the kind of more leather padded and
I mean, that's what I found the most exciting about the show, was I felt there was a real progression, like a real leap forward for him as a designer, not just as a showman, but like I really enjoyed the clothes. I thought the clothes were great, and I can see them existing in reality beyond the runway presentation, beyond the characters, the makeup, the hair. There was the tailoring was, it was exciting. It felt dangerous. Anarchic, and wearable. The knitwear was fantastic.
I think the kind of the wearability, and I loathe that word, but it really comes from the fact that he does live it, and he wears his collection. He probably shouldn't. His PR probably tells him off for that, but he wears it out, and so has a real grasp on how it makes the wearer feel. And what you look for in clothes.
But it's wearable on the dangerous side, I mean, you can see, and which I like, and you can see the references in there. It's almost a little bit like a history lesson. But not literally, I see the references, but he has got a knack of updating them.
Well, I think there's that interesting thing about the history lesson aspect to a lot of design or even campaigns, you know, those Instagram accounts that call out copyists or, you know, this idea of inspiration being actually not respecting inspiration, not being able to actually just take something and go, you know what, yeah, as Demna of Vetements recently said, yeah, I loved, you know, I'm going to do the most modular collection ever. So I think there's something quite important about that, because if we start shutting off that idea of using the past, I just wonder whether this is a little bit old, a bit almost romantic, and not that that's a problem, but romantic for a very particular period that might not exist anymore, but maybe it does. Simon, what do you think?
What do you mean when you say romantic?
For me, it feels like that 80s, that queer club, taboo, and all of this stuff. And maybe that's my naivety in hoping that we've moved forward in terms of conversations about gender and race and class, but maybe we haven't, and I need to take off my rose-tinted glasses, because it seems like we haven't, but my issue is the time we live in right now is everything is amplified. So of course, if you go on Twitter, everything seems to be wrong with the world. When I worry about that this is very reactionary to a very small amount of people, like a small whirlpool of people, all just banging the same drum. But again, I don't know, what do you think of it?
I mean, I think it was really interesting when you knew the backstory about this book that he'd read, and I think that the strongest shows often are the ones that have a really personal backstory. I think it's why Grace is such a great designer. And actually, you know, when you go backstage and you hear those stories, it makes the whole thing come together in a completely different way. I liked the fact that he painted in his own tartan. I thought that was a really nice touch. I personally find shows where it's very performance-y, slightly like irksome. But, you know, I think what's so brilliant about it is that, you know, it's what fashion should do. It should be a bit divisive. It should make people go, oh, like, you know, Natalie Kingham, the bar director on Women's Wear at Matches Fashion, was absolutely, like, we almost had to restrain her from joining in. She was so excited. And she's bought Charles on Women's, and it's working really well. So, you know, it's a conversation starter, and I think it made everyone talk. And actually, if we're saying that London is losing this sense of being a conversation starter, whatever you think of what he's doing in terms of fashion, he's doing that. And I think there is worth in that, even if what you think about the clothes is it's not your thing.
Also, I would say, you know, kind of what you said about Twitter, and there is, you know, if you look at Twitter, you do kind of come away with the feeling that everything in the world is going wrong.
Yes.
You know, we come away with this doom, and makes one feel quite existential. I think that he has a fearlessness that transcends that. So, you know, there is this kind of echo chamber of so many opinions out there now. Anyone can have an opinion about anything, and to actually be incredibly bold and fearless with what you do and to put it out there in a very kind of open way, I think is something that's quite rare. A lot of people are quite afraid of that, I think, especially designers.
George, what do you think about this idea of the irksome performance? Or this idea that a performance can sometimes take over or actually change how you feel about something?
No, I do agree, but obviously I'm a little biased because we filmed this.
The editing is wonderful.
Thank you very much. Take that away. I think it fits so well with Charles, and if he hadn't had this huge performative aspect, you'd be a bit deflated. And I know that personally, I think the clothes stand out for themselves anyway. But I think if it was just the clothes walking down the runway, we'd all be a bit like, oh, hang on a minute, you come from a clubbing background and you're so your personality is so out there and amazing, and why is that not being translated into the set and everything? And so I think this is very representative of Charles. I totally get where you're coming from in that it is a bit of an assault on all the senses. But I think it goes perfectly with what Charles is trying to do. And as we were saying earlier, I think the clothes are so strong, and this really was, for me anyway, Charles coming into his own. And to me it felt a bit like, I know we had all the anger references in the book and such, but to me this kind of felt like him personifying all the anger from the slight backlash that he's had occasionally. And it was, to me, the clothes were two fingers up being like, see, I can make...
What sort of backlash do you mean?
As in,
this is taking over what's going on?
Yeah, no, just, I know some people have been a bit iffy about his references and being like, that's Galliano, that's Westwood, such and such and such. But he's always been so explicit about those references. So to me, this was a bit like, take your references and shove it. I've got this amazing, flamboyant, in your face, blah, blah, blah.
It's so interesting. I taught a course a while ago, and there was this little girl, and she lives in Thailand. And I remember I took the students to Charles's studio, and I mean, she was in tears meeting him, and her only connection to that world is through Instagram. You know, I can only assume that I hope I taught her who Galliano and Westwood were, but you know, the fact that it resonated with this little girl on the other side of the world who is looking to London, I think, and kind of building this idea around it is incredible. You know, it kind of goes back to that London as a brand thing. What is it? Well,
it's fascinating to me, this, because in other words, you know, we do see there is a generation is going out less. You know, a generation is clubbing less. They're taking less drugs. They're drinking less. You know, we are in a more of a puritanical age, if you like, particularly with, you know, the types of people that I guess Charles was, or maybe some of us were, when we were 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, those formative periods of one's life, particularly within fashion, particularly in a city like this. This is so opposite to a lot of those experiences, because it's so visceral, it's so tactile, it's an assault on the senses that goes really against a lot of the ways that we are being led to believe, rightly or wrongly, how people are actually living. So I think it does almost have that charm in actually taking people back. And I think my own issues with it, in terms of it being a bit Westwood and a bit Galliano and a bit this, I think are my own. You know, I don't see them as, that's not necessarily a criticism of what he's doing. I just feel like we've seen it, or we've had it before, but that doesn't actually mean that we can't have it again. And I think that's what's really important, this cycle that fashion presents. I think a lot of us do get very bogged down. I know I do, and going, well, you know, someone's done that already. But there isn't this massive tick list where, right, Galliano did this, so we can't do it every
Seen those shoulders before.
Seen that shoulder, seen that
he's done a very good job of igniting some excitement, you know, and you know, I think we're all hoping that this is going to catch fire and it's going to spread through.
Do we think he'll stay in London?
Yes.
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 Do we think that's the right business decision, though?
I think it's also important to remember that it's still quite early days in the sense in which, you know, it's not been going for huge amounts of time, and I think that in fashion sometimes we get into this quite bubble idea that you know once you graduate from Man, you've kind of suddenly become this, and actually it takes longer, and I think it's really important for designers to stretch themselves, and you know, but also like, you know, push the creative button as much as they can. I think the other thing that kind of strikes me a little bit about it is that increasingly, you know, designers are having to go that extra mile to get attention, and I think that it's hard because there's so much visual culture now, and we're consuming so much of it that the boredom levels are so high. And you know, sometimes I'm just a bit like, does this mean that everything has to be so sort of frenzied somehow?
Yeah, but I think we also need to think about, you know, is really, you know, jumping ship to Paris that beneficial? Are you know, having a catwalk show in Paris, are editors going to attend? You know, it's a difficult schedule.
Good luck finding the time.
First of all, to get on, and then it's a difficult schedule for us to find the time to see this.
Is it meant to be a big fish in a smaller pond?
Yes.
Yes, I think you want to be seen.
It's also easier, you know, if you think about it, he works with Theo Adams' company. All of those dancers, and Theo is based in London, which pragmatically makes it much easier to stage a show like that, because you can actually get the people that you know and work with. And I think when you move to Paris, there are so many big costs incurred that perhaps people don't realise. You know, you're probably going to be spending 10 times the amount that you do when you're putting on a show.
And then what if nobody comes?
Exactly.
You know, what if you know, if you're sandwiched between, you know, two key advertisers which press
And one runs
have
late.
to attend, and one runs over.
But I think it's interesting because I was having a conversation with one of my editors today, and we were talking about Charles actually, and I think designers at that stage are constantly torn between this idea of having to move on and renew yourself every single season to give something new, a new idea, a new story, and kind of reaffirming your signature and your key pieces, which I think Craig does really well. But also for, the average magazine reader in Britain, for example, I think they still see Charles as very much an emerging designer, probably don't know who he is. And so it takes time for the consumer to get to know these designers and actually become aware of them. Whereas in fashion and on Instagram, it's so easy to kind of become familiar with these people who are making a lot of noise. So it's kind of about balancing those two as well.
Well, you mentioned kind of man, so let's move on to man, because that feels like the right link here. So man, of course, we had Art School, Rottingdean Bazaar, again, and new to the roster was Stefan Cook. What did you all make of this? Because this, again, is a very Marmite type of show. It's one that elicits many, many different responses. I think because it partly feels so London, that it's so navel-gazing and inward-looking, that it's very difficult to engage with it unless you've gone out with one of these people or got drunk with them. It feels like this club that maybe you might not have an invitation to. Rightly or wrongly, that's not necessarily a criticism, but it's an observation. Simon, I bet you love all of this.
Well, the thing about this is that I think that the conversations that are going on in fashion at the moment around diversity and looking at the ways in which people present clothes and on what people they present them on is incredibly important and brilliant. And I think it's amazing that London is one of the absolute champions of that. And that goes back to me as being always something that this capital has been known for. And I also think that, I think the other thing to go back to the very early conversations about different cities is that, there is a sort of cycle of certain cities being in fashion. And there was a period where London Fashion Week wasn't that fashionable, and then it became really fashionable. And so, this is kind of has a lot of merit in the sense that it's re-engaging people with this idea of that London is a very big celebration of lots of different things, and as a fashion capital and as a capital city, probably does that more than any other city in the world. Do I like the clothes? Not hugely. But that, it's not always about that, is it? It's actually necessarily pushing a kind of different idea. I think for me, I liked Man when you got three very different designers on the same runway, because you felt like you were learning something about London in a bigger way. Whereas I feel like there's a sense...
Well, when it was more diverse.
Yeah, ironically, yeah, but for me, I can't always tell, and I wonder if people outside of fashion can tell which design... There feels like a lot of crossover to me.
I think that's quite dangerous. I think they should...
So it's about the curation.
Yes.
I was just going to say, I agree. There's something about the creation and the curation that's
stuck.
Or
is it not that these designers are all questioning and engaging with the same issues, and they're all resulting in... Are they not?
No, because Stefan is very different.
Stefan is very different. Stefan sticks out, but I think the season before this was... You didn't know where one dress...
I think adding Stefan in was a good move.
Yeah.
When you look back at old man shows, like when you had like Aggie and Sam and Craig and like Eat-Horts or something like that, that weird mix of things to me felt more urgent and exciting and flipped your head around a bit.
I feel like if Stefan was in one of those three, you'd be like, oh, look at that. So exciting. Look at those techniques, haven't seen those before. But in this trio, he gets kind of overshadowed. Love you, Stefan. But it's really difficult to follow Rottingdean Bazaar.
I didn't think so, because I thought that his work actually really stood out despite that. Because
he closed the show, so I mean, there must be something in that. That was the lasting impression. But this stuff, let's talk about this. where is this performative, this costume, where does this fit into things? Because this is kind of the stuff that people still want London to produce. And I think that's what I meant at the beginning, is this sense of responsibility that London has to be jolly and to be a bit mad and a bit queer and a bit odd.
Sometimes as well, you know,
And what?
kind of laughed at.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Newspaper readers.
This is designed to go on the Mail Online and,
Yeah.
and for people to kind of say, we're not going to go and...
Empress New Clothes.
You're going to move to London and study fashion, are you mad? And in some ways, that's quite frustrating. But for me, this feels like it fulfills an agenda, which is kind of, lol, look at London, it's kind of a bit mad sometimes. Not that that's a bad thing, but I don't know, what do you all... Where does this go?
I think it's fun and very London-centric, and it's what people want to... It's what I feel people, students or whatever, will look at this and be like, oh, that's so fantastic, how conceptual, how exciting. But to
Do you want students looking at this?
I don't know, but to have a spot in Fashion East when your clothes don't actually, like, none of this goes into production. So that to me feels a little bit
having said
cheeky.
that, you know, with Rottingdean, you know, the last show that they did with all the sweatshirts, you could buy those sweatshirts, and I thought that was
true. That's true.
Yeah, it was polyurethane, and it was designed to look like household objects.
Yeah.
And I thought that was incredibly clever.
Yeah, and I think the bottle top synthetic heat press, garments are really interesting and super wearable.
And also, you know, they're both based in a small seaside town in East Sussex. They don't have a big London studio and Paris showroom and have all of these kind of overheads that they need to push out a sweatshirt with a logo on and, you know, meet those budget requirements and things like that. I think they can kind of do what they want and sell badges and be...
Yeah, and presumably some of this isn't, I think there's also, it's quite clear when designers are not necessarily saying we want to be Balenciaga. They're also evolving as designers. They're all, again, still emerging. And there's nothing wrong in being niche. Fashion needs niche, and it would be depressing if we didn't have those kinds of people that kind of asked questions and said, what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is this, what is that. I just think that we're in a little bit of danger of it becoming too much of the lol thing and not enough of okay, so we've done this, but actually here's a really great something. I don't know, it's complicated.
I think it's bordering on pantomime when it should be theatre, and I think that's why Charles is so much better, because he's asking those questions. There's fun, but it still has guts. There's a political kind of... This just feels almost a bit too, I guess, not serious enough. And I know that sounds kind of unfair, but I do think there should be some seriousness, because we've all come to look. We've all come here for a reason. What are you telling us? What is happening? If you want to be an artist, or if you want to make costume that tells us different things about the world, that's fine, but I don't know whether fashion is the right kind of framework in order to do that.
I don't see art school as costume or pantomime, though.
No.
I see them as a separate beast entirely.
Yeah.
I think they're entirely... I really want to see them show outside of Fashion East. I want them to have... I want to see what they bring in the set. I want to see what they bring in, use their own kind of space with their own creative freedom, because I do feel like...
Yeah. I mean, my feeling with Rottingdean Bazaar is that it feels like an art project. I don't want to say an art project, but it feels like an art piece. Yeah. It's
potentially they could have had a exhibition space in the showrooms.
That's not to say I didn't enjoy the show, because I did, but I don't know how it really sits in with fashion.
I think I don't think that either of them are preoccupied with notions of traditional fashion or luxury or, commercial collections or anything like that. I think that they see fashion in a very different way, and that comes through in their image making. And
yeah, no, I agree. I think that for them it's not. I think they're preoccupied by other things, which is, and again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, it's an interesting dialogue. There's something in there that I'm definitely engaged with, but I don't know where it's going.
Well, I think that some of it is that the discussions around it are more interesting than the clothes, and that for me is fine. and you need people to push certain envelopes, but ultimately, you know, when you're actually sat down and going, but what are these clothes about? I just don't know. I sort of don't really care. I mean, I think, you know, like, I think it's much more interesting from an arty, creative, let's talk about what it means to be fashionable, but I don't actually like the fashion.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to John Alexander Skelton, another designer who's, again, choosing to display his collections in a very performative, performance-based way. And I guess what's interesting is that we're now focusing on these designers because I feel like that is probably what London is about and maybe should continue being about. Jason, I know you were at the show, so why don't you tell us how this was? Because this is just a lookbook, this isn't the actual show, but how did the show play out?
So this was the first night, so the Friday night, at a church in East London, and the walls of the church were covered with painted cloth, and holes were cut into the painted cloth, and out of those holes, masked heads appeared of the men who walked in the show. And then each man came from his position, stepped out from behind the curtain with his mask, introducing himself, and walked around the audience.
And how was it? How did it feel?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really exciting show, a really a highlight for London Fashion Week. I thought they were, for me, you know, it's you know, I'm looking at the clothes.
Yeah.
You know, of course, we're looking at the whole performance, but I thought the clothes were beautifully crafted. They felt, even though they very heavily reference sort of historical garments, they still very cleverly felt very modern in their sort of patchwork constructions. Some really amazing knitwear.
Is he under the Saraband umbrella? He is, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's true testament to him, actually, the kind of, you know, I think the people that are sort of interested in him, you know, Simon Costin, the set designer, was in the show, and then Judy Blame was, you know, in the audience, and Simon Costin, Stephen Jones did the hats, you know, and that's a long-standing collaboration because Stephen worked with him on his MA collection. But I think he's a particularly interesting London menswear designer, you know, and definitely...
And quite quiet again.
I was just going to say,
all of that.
I was just going to say a little quieter than Charles. You know, there is a theatrical element there, but they're totally different.
Yeah.
Who buys him, just out of interest?
I don't know.
I think
Where is it? Is it in Dover Street?
I think it's about 5 stockists. It's quite small distribution. I mean, we're all big fans at work, and I think this is a diverse casting that seems sort of super interesting. And I think the clothes, obviously the sort of sustainable storyline behind the scenes, I think is really interesting and resonates with lots of conversations that are going on in the bigger industry about how we make fashion less wasteful.
That's what you should call your biography, Sustainable Behind the Scenes.
Do you think?
Or Behind the Scenes.
I mean, for me, he really sort of... He made me think of Christopher Nemeth. He really did, you know, in a little bit in the design, you know, but I think it is a niche product, but that's not to say it can't be a successful product.
It feels special, though, I guess, when you kind of hold it. They feel like they've been made by hand. And I guess there's some of that tradition that has largely gone from fashion completely. So there's something quite kind of small
Feels
about
very
this.
London still as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does, it does. But more cerebral, I guess, a little bit kind of more...
I mean, I don't think we would see this anywhere else.
No, and I also think it's like, actually you see it and you... So often, like when castings become interesting, you don't always work with the clothes, but this really does. And you can sort of imagine this man, and he's quite a London man, actually, I think.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, there's just something about it, and it's kind of, I just believe it.
Yeah.
In a way that some of the other designers, I'm less kind of convinced.
Are there
in a
any
way.
designers who we don't believe showing in London?
Dun, dun, dun.
Were there any that you just thought,
I mean,
I don't know?
I feel as though every designer that we've talked about so far kind of lives there, you know, like when you see John, he is that man, and it's the same with Charles, and it's same with Art School and Rossingdean. So I don't know, authenticity is such a big word at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you go away from, you know, from John's show sort of having learned something. You know.
I love
Very
that.
spiritual.
Yeah, I sort of left the show
You
like
want that though,
having
no?
been introduced to a world that I'd never been privy to before. You know, this whole, you know, this wassailing culture he was talking about people like, you know, singing in the harvest, and you know, it was, I mean, I don't know anything about it.
And cue the demonstration.
Yeah,
singing in
but
the harvest.
But that's important.
But I think that's important that, you know, he's introducing us to things that maybe that are out there, but maybe they're not sort of generally
And also,
out there.
it's not a part of the official schedule.
No.
It was on the day before the London shows actually kicked off, and
Yeah.
I don't think that he has any interest in
But
being
why
part of
not? Because I don't think that's.
I remember I
I don't
once
think that's
spoke-
through choice. I'm sure there's some reason.
That's the interesting thing about
I
London.
agree. There's a reason why he is not on the schedule. I don't know what that reason is, but he should be.
And why was Martine Rose never on the schedule? Like for 2 seasons she showed off schedule.
I think
It
that's
was-
just her though. She just does what she fancies whenever she fancies, and it works.
Yeah.
Well, I just think she's immune to whatever.
Well, we are moving back into this almost cottage industry, if you like, of actually everyone breaking off and just doing what works for them. You know, I think
Which is not necessarily a bad thing.
No,
It's
And
like,
it's a very London thing as well.
and when you look at the schedule in London, you do sort of think, well, why do a lot of these brands need to have a show? They just don't. And actually, you know, maybe the future of London is that it's broken down into a slightly different way of thinking about things. So maybe there is a day where there are a handful of designers that really do come alive on a show situation, whether it's Charles and Craig and Grace or whoever. And then there's a day of presentations from more commercial brands, and then maybe more people would come. I sort of think it was slightly differently organised.
Yeah.
I feel like they're really missing a trick with the London showrooms.
Yeah.
It's just not big enough. There's not enough push towards it. And
In Paris, you mean?
no, in London.
Oh, in London. Yeah.
It shouldn't be that we have to go to Paris to
I agree.
see all these designers.
No.
And if they have this wonderful space on the Strand, I don't even go. You miss the show. I mean, I try, but you miss the showrooms
No, it's
because
amazing.
but certain brands, little brands, could be there. Could be meeting, greeting people, which surely would be better for them in the long run anyway.
I mean, I think we all, you know, for me, you know, I don't need to see any of these ambassadors. You know, trotting around. I mean, trotting around for how many days they're
In a three-piece suit.
they're employed to do. You know, doing.
I think this is the thing, isn't it? Paid
Doing
for by
forging.
taxpayers. I mean, the government puts a lot of money into London Fashion
Is it
Week.
though? I don't.
David Gandy.
I don't.
Well, I
need
think
this.
there is
The
this.
British Council.
No one does.
A lot of money is generated at a governmental level for this, right? Because you know, its success is actually measured globally on how much press it gets, and I think that has overshadowed sometimes a lot of the talent, the design talent.
But I don't understand having some column inches in a tabloid with some pictures of Oliver Cheshire or whoever,
And Pixie.
and Pixie, at some shows. How much benefit that is to the British Fashion Council, and I don't believe for one moment that there's any journalist or any buyer looking at those thinking, oh, I'm going to pop over to London Fashion Week because Oliver Cheshire's there.
Also,
You don't even want to get on the
that
bus.
doesn't translate to sales for the designer.
And it also
that doesn't
does not,
translate.
and it also does not, they're apparently ambassadors, but they, for me, they don't translate what London is about.
No, well, I think that level of diversity
it's a
that we're
very-
celebrating
that
in
doesn't,
places.
that doesn't relate to Skelton or Jeffrey or anything we've just
None
seen.
of those.
No.
And if they're
Someone
going
in
to
the
be at
front
any
row.
of those shows, they're going to be sitting there, not only standing and
There was-
sniggering.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's that embarrassing moment when David Gandy kind of railed off against Craig Green and all of those structures in his show. And it does go to show that there is such a disparity between that side of London menswear, which is so much more traditional, and, the fashion with a capital F side of it, which is, I suppose, what we're looking at now.
That fashion, not that it was ever fashion, it's not working. All those Savile Row brands are in dire straits. They're massively in trouble. They're finding it extremely difficult to reinvent, and it doesn't feel particularly relevant, or we really want to look at it.
I think that it represents an idea of Britain that sells abroad. So for a foreign customer, when they think of British menswear, they think of Savile Row and all of these ideas around tradition and kind of, stateliness and kind of grandeur, which is just not really, I don't know anyone that has gone to Savile Row to get a tweed suit.
No.
Probably not in the right circle for it, but it does feel feels very alien and foreign even within London.
Well, I think it's tricky. I think now obviously we are all speaking to the world all of the time, and I think those traditional ways of actually saying, well, the Asian customer actually wants suits from us. I don't know whether it's almost there's now the whole world is looking, and there is no one way of presenting a place or a city. And I guess what we always need, again, diversity is such an overused term, but we need diversity in everything. So the schedule should have those tailoring brands, but just the good ones, because there are lots of not so good ones. And it should just have these designers making structures like Craig Green, who we're going to talk about next. But also, it just needs an edit, and I think all cities could do with that. And I think for some, I've always been very critical / hesitant of the Man Fashion East factory that London is often celebrated for, because I feel it often presents people onto a global scale who aren't ready, who quite happily don't want to be designers, and then they get onto this hamster wheel, and we watch them spin around for maybe 8-9 seasons, and then they fall off and die.
Yeah.
And it's really, really unfair in some ways. So that's why it's quite exciting in some ways to hear you say about some of the man designers actually living, outside of London and in some ways escaping that bubble, because they can it's easier to exist making those kind of clothes also, if you don't have to pay rent in a city like this.
Any of those kind of younger designers crave those big positions at bigger fashion houses anymore, No. I think that the truth is that those people in those jobs are very miserable, and they're much more aware of that.
I don't feel like a safe space anymore, really.
No.
Whereas perhaps before, London was more of a kind of auditioning grounds for those big jobs. I think that just feels very outdated now.
What do we think of Craig? And Craig's development, I guess, from the designer that he was to where he is now? Structures are still there, they're just more developed.
I just think that he's done it in such a smart way, because he has a very clear signature look, which he plays with each season and moves on each season and asks you to think about what it is this season. And there are always great moments in his shows, like with these incredible sweaters that were like sweatshirt and t-shirt and all these things. And when you look at them backstage, you're like trying to work out which bit's connected to what and what it's all made of. But equally, what I've really noticed walking around London is how many men are wearing that classic quilted jacket. And how many people who don't work in fashion, quite a lot of my friends that don't work in fashion, who've got those kinds of pieces and are actually like really interested in what he's doing. And I think to have both a kind of real appeal to a fashion mindset and to also dress men, which is ultimately, if you want to develop a business, you have to do, is kind of clever. And I think what he's done is by introducing this core range that is designed in between. So he designs the main collection, then he designs this core collection. And I think it's so clever, and he's introducing it slowly. He's not trying to do it too quickly. Added denim last season, but he's also being he's working within those things in a very smart way, because he sort of said that he sometimes will be working on the core collection, which is meant to be the more commercial thing, and then I think, oh no, actually that really works in the show. And I think that shows a massive dexterity in terms of like his intellect and the way in which he's putting the stuff together.
And where I'm conscious of time, can we look at Grace, please? because I love what Grace does. And again, it's just such a funny thing, this idea of it not translating well as a picture and a show, and because we, you know, I think we really need to develop that, or you know, get a way around that, because it feels like there are lots of experiences that people are missing out on because they aren't in certain places. And equally, I think a Grace Wales Abona show is always so beautiful, but it's partly beautiful because you feel like you're being tested. She does hand out these kind of very dense, quite academic notes, which I think Sarah Moa noted in her Vogue Runway review, that you could throw them away and you'd still think the clothes are beautiful, which is a little bit unfair, but as in terms of the notes and whoever spent time writing them, as we know sometimes, Osman. But I just think what Grace does, it's really moved on as well from what people know her for, which I know some people prefer the pearls and the kind of slightly more, I guess, basic level of twisting of gender and queerness. But how do you all feel about this collection and how it's moved on?
I thought it was beautiful. And I also feel like her price tag is a little eye-watering at the most of times. But this feels like something I could, not that I could afford, but something that I would be willing to save up for, whereas previous collections, I feel like my mum would slap me and be like, you fool, why have you spent £1,000 on a beaded t-shirt, whereas if I came in one of these cream jackets, she'd be like, it was worth every penny, look how grown up you are.
It's incredibly sensual, I thought.
Yeah.
Really.
I felt very kind of touched by it in the end. It was, it has a quietness to it, but I felt the show was a massive step forward for her.
I think she's also like Craig, though. She is doing it slightly under her own steam. She's not trying to like rush it. I think all the kind of cultural references that she layers within. I mean, I loved all this installation she did with this artist Eric Mack, which is going to be an ongoing thing. And I think that, you know, aside from the quality of when you see her clothes in the showroom, the quality is amazing, and you want to put it on and you want to like swish around in it, and you know that's really important if you're going to sort of develop a brand. And I think her ideas around how she's balancing the menswear and then launching women's, and she's again, it's like a really good sort of balance.
I think sort of similar to Craig, there's like a rigor to them as designers. You know, every season they choose some, you know, they maybe take something away, but then they select something else to add and develop and hone. And you know, I really feel that with both Craig and her, that you know they're true designers.
They're designers you trust. I think there's something about a designer, particularly when you're investing in them, even emotionally, not necessarily financially. There's got to be that sense of trust there, and I think I trust her with almost with my life.
She has incredible taste.
It's just there's a real consistency and a rigor to what she's doing, and I think there's something, and that you often don't really see.
It feels touched by the hand.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of somebody's...
Yes,
God.
But when I say touched by the hand of the designer, you know, it feels like sometimes the clothing feels removed from the designer, whereas this feels like it's really loved.
Feels like method acting almost, like...
It's very...
Yeah, she goes very deep into that world, and she's intensely...
It can't be by anyone else. Like, you wouldn't...
No.
You know, and I think even the fact that people were slightly joking on Instagram that, you know, Grace for Celine is a testament to the level of skill that she shows through the work that she does.
Well, I think when Veronique hangs up her shears at Hermes after 20 years she's been there, I think Grace should go there.
Such good taste.
Absolutely.
I mean, Hermes by Grace Bonner would just be incredible.
Divine.
You know,
Absolutely
and also,
divine.
I think Grace has expensive taste, which is, you know...
But also in the framework of London, we don't really do expensive in terms of the look.
I think also this
doesn't happen
collection... This collection also was interesting because she added in some things that were a little bit different, like these little sort of like wind cheatery hoodie things, which I'm guessing are going to be slightly less expensive than the amazing tailoring.
With a sportiness we've not seen before.
And I think that's good.
We've never seen the print before.
The print was beautiful.
And, you know, we were talking earlier about kind of crediting inspiration. You know, she flies everyone out from whether it's Senegal or Jamaica or wherever, to be at the show, and they're very much involved with the show. So the artist Jacob Lawrence, I think either he was there or, you know, she has so many amazing collaborators, and she brings them into the fold and really involves them, which is great.
Well, we're convinced. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a very interesting discussion. A round of applause for the designers for London.